What will we be learning during our study of Numbers? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we begin our study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible. In today's episode, we return again to the Old Testament and begin our seventh study of our walk through the Bible, a study of the book of Numbers. All told, it will take us 132 lessons to cover this book, with the teaching of each lesson being between 5 to 7 minutes in length. We hope you'll join us for each episode of this study. Numbers is the fourth book of the Old Testament and is also the fourth of the books of the law. The book itself contains the historical narrative of the Israelites in the wilderness of Sinai beginning on the first day of the second month of the second year following their departure from Egypt. In essence, then, Numbers picks up the story where we left off at the end of Exodus. In all, the book covers the time period beginning 13 months after the Exodus from Egypt, all the way through the 40 years of wilderness wandering. In the Hebrew Old Testament, the book is designated by its opening word, Bemidbar, which is translated in the wilderness. In the Septuagint, the Greek translators gave the title of the book Arithmoi, which in English means numbers. Why did they change the name? Most likely because this book contains the two numberings of the people of Israel in chapters 1 through 4 and then again in chapter 26. As for the author, in chapters 1, 3, 33, and 36, the book itself makes it clear that this book is the product of what God commanded Moses to write. The book's author is also central to the story. And then, of course, the New Testament often makes reference to the events recorded in Numbers and associates those events with Moses. Thus, we can be fairly certain that Moses authored the book through the inspiration of God. If this is correct, then when was the book of Numbers written? Well, it must have been written sometime in Moses' lifetime, which spanned from about 1526 to 1406 BC. However, this date for this book can be further narrowed down due to the fact that it begins a year after the Exodus and ends shortly before Israel enters the Promised Land. Therefore, the book must have been completed around 1406 BC, though its writing may have been in progress since about 1444 BC. With all of this in mind, why was Numbers written? What is the reason that we have this book in the Bible? Why is it important? Well, for one, it records for us the continuing history of the people of Israel. Since Genesis 12 and the call of Abraham, we have been given the story of the children of Israel. There are gaps in this history, such as the 400 years of slavery in Egypt, but those gaps are mentioned. Deuteronomy will take place just before the entry into the Promised Land, and Joshua will show us the conquest. What happened between Sinai and Canaan is thus important to know, for 40 years will pass. Why did it take so long to go from Mount Sinai in Arabia to Canaan, a journey that should have taken a couple months, not almost half a century? Numbers will provide us with that explanation. Numbers also shows us how the loosely affiliated tribes of Israel became organized into the theocratic nation in preparation for life in the Promised Land. Each tribe was going to be given land, not only based on what tribe they came from, but what family within each tribe they came from. Therefore, it was important to know which family you were from and the totals of their numbers. But Numbers provides us more than history. It also provides us some doctrine as well. Though you might miss this by simply reading the narrative, Numbers actually does teach us that the success or failure of Israel would depend solely upon whether or not the people would faithfully obey God in all that he commanded them. When they followed God, God would be with them, and they would be victorious. However, when they rebelled, God wouldn't be with them, and they would be defeated. God didn't accept Israel in sin and would punish them for their sins. Numbers also demonstrates to us the faithfulness of God in providing for his people. They were still receiving manna from heaven, something we saw begin in the book of Exodus. Even during the wilderness wanderings, which were punishment for rebellion, God didn't totally annihilate his people. He still provided for them. For us, we need to learn to depend on God for our needs too, for he is faithful to provide them. In addition to all of this, though, Numbers does give us some new laws for Israel that was not contained in Exodus or Leviticus. These laws would serve as a manual for Israel to follow in everyday life while wandering in the wilderness prior to settling in Canaan. Before closing then, let's look at one of the other reasons we have the book of Numbers, which is that it points us to Jesus. When we study the book of John, the Lord willing after this study, we're going to see a couple of times there are references to numbers. For instance, the bronze serpent that God directed Moses to have Israel look upon in order for them to be healed of the effects of being bitten by the poisonous snakes foreshadows what Jesus said in John 3:14 about all people needing to look to Jesus and the cross in order to be healed from the effects of sin. The manna provided by God to satisfy Israel's hunger would be referenced in John 6 as a foreshadowing of Jesus being the bread of life, who would eternally satisfy men's spiritual hunger. And then later on in the New Testament, a man by the name of Balaam is mentioned. This man was a Mesopotamian prophet whom the king of Moab hired to curse Israel. During the course of his prophecies, Balaam spoke by inspiration in Numbers 24:17 about a future king who would arise out of Israel. Of course, Israel would have kings arise from it, but only one king of Israel would have the importance to the whole world, and that would be Jesus. So throughout this book, we will see Israel tested and tried by God, and those that survive would be a suitable people through whom God would fulfill his promises to bring a Savior, the man Jesus. Overall then, this will be an interesting study, one that I hope you'll join us for. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers chapter 1, verses 1 to 16, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.